Hello, everyone. I'm Charlie, and welcome to the UEFA Champions League DraftKings DFS soccer slate breakdown. I'm excited for this slate. Like some really nice contests. I think DraftKings has done a really good job finally, and kind of giving the people what they want, and nice contests and pretty competitive prices, which kind of makes it a super intriguing slate. In terms of the game itself and the odds, Real Madrid pretty big favorites at minus 160. You rarely see that in a final. So that's super interesting. Another thing is both teams to score is at yes at minus 130, which is kind of against what we've seen these last couple European finals in the Conference League and the Europa League. Both games had clean sheets. Both games also won by underdogs, interestingly enough. So maybe a little bit of a trend there in Dortmund's favor. And yeah, so it's super interesting that both teams to score is so high. Typically, these finals have been pretty cagey, and they usually are in the past too. We think of like the last couple years. Who was it? When Man City won against Inter, they had a clean sheet. Real Madrid against Liverpool, there was a clean sheet there. So I think there's a little bit of juice on no, or it should be a little bit higher than it is, and that also makes goalkeepers super interesting on a slate like this too. However, on the other hand, bookmakers always know, like, they could be right. I think it just depends on how early the first goal goes in, really sets the tempo. In terms of the match totals, 2.5 is at minus 130. So it's about a 2.5. Pretty standard for most of these games. Probably fair here too. Although I wouldn't be surprised if it went under that for sure. In terms of projected lineups for FootMob, I imagine this will probably be right. I'd be surprised if we saw Marco Reus in, even though this is kind of his legacy game right here. A chance to win a big trophy with Dortmund, the UCL. I'm sure he'll come on off the bench at some point, which could also be an interesting facet on DraftKings if you're into playing subs and in these big field GPPs. That's a great way to get different. Like you see teams take down all the time with just a sub coming on and scoring a brace. Like I can't think of a slate off the top of my head, but I think in like last year's semifinals, where it was like Rodrigo came on for like 2 goals against Man City, and I think he was in the winning lineup for the GPP for that. So, oh yeah, and especially because it's a game that could go extra time. I guess a lot of minutes that a sub could get if they come on, like say the 60th minute, they're getting 60 minutes right there. It's basically a starter, and he's going to have like under 1% ownership. So definitely a couple different ways to get different here for sure. It's interesting to have Rodrigo at striker too. I imagine that front three will be pretty fluid, like Bellingham, Rodrigo, Vinicius. They could all end up just wherever. Kroos in the midfield too. He's also leaving at the end of the season and retiring. So a little bit of a narrative there, although he's super expensive on DraftKings, which worries me a little bit considering he's also a guy who gets subbed quite often, especially at his age. They also have Nacho and Rudiger as the center back pairing. I think that's also a little strange considering Chouameni, I guess. He's back in training, but he could definitely slot in at center back over Nacho. Everything else I think will probably be right for Real Madrid. And Lunin still dealing with that virus. It's a little bit unfair to him that Courtois is kind of just going to probably go back in goal. So we'll see what they do game day. But I think Courtois is probably the favorite to start right now, as the projected lineups have too. All right. So yeah, no real surprises. In terms of set pieces, Kroos Monopoly in this team. He plays a lot of them short, though. That's one thing to think about. He gets subbed a lot. And if Modric comes in, he'll probably have a share too, even if they're both on at the same time. For Dortmund, mostly Brandt, but we could see Sancho take something too. Royce could take something if he comes on. So it's not exactly a concrete set plan. That's the issue with them. And now for prices and kind of some strategies I'm thinking about. Well, I'll just go prices first, and then I'll talk a little bit more about construction strategies and how to kind of go about this. Vinicius Jr. is the most expensive. I think he has like minus odds chances of a goal or an assist. I was looking just briefly looking at some player props, and you can see why. Like he's got 9 goal contributions in 9 games. This kind of really, I think, sets up to what could be like a Ballon d'Or deciding game between Vinicius and Bellingham if one of them really kind of pops off, gets like a couple goal contributions, or just wins the game in just dramatic fashion. I think the Copa America and Euros also could have a factor, but I think there's a really big chance that if one of these guys does super well, that could lead them just to a Ballon d'Or. I think they're both really great plays too in this matchup. They're arguably, I'd say, safer than like a Tony Kroos. I usually preach playing for like floor and cash. I think if there was a game to kind of ignore set pieces, ignore the traditional kind of floor plays, this is probably it. They're not super high floors typically either. Like Kroos is pretty solid, but he could very easily drop like a 4 to a 6 here, and like no one would be surprised whatsoever, especially considering he could get subbed early. He's not played 90 in so long, and just that's super worrying. And I'd rather go to a Vinny or a Bellingham who probably don't get subbed, or at least don't get subbed in regulation. If it goes extra time, you never know. Who gets tired legs, someone could cramp, and that could lead to an early substitution. But they should go pretty long, and they both have a pretty decent floor. It's nothing crazy. It's nothing super consistent. Like Vinicius had 17 points in the last game, and you couldn't really even I couldn't even really tell you how. Yes, all those shots and a couple of crosses. But that's what makes Vinny such a good play. He's got the highest upside on the slate, not a terrible floor. Same with Jude, who's probably a little bit worse at both those things, but he's also cheaper because of that. Rodrigo, I think will go a little bit under the radar because I think everyone will be on Jude and Vinicius over them. I have no doubt that he'll be the least owned of the front three in both GPP and cash formats. That makes him pretty intriguing in both. The issue with him is that he's probably the most likely of the front three to get subbed. If they're chasing the game, I could definitely see him throw on like a Joselu or Brahim Diaz or even like an Arda Güler for him. He's probably the first guy off if they're chasing, especially. So I worry about that slightly, but there could be some decent ownership leverage there, and he's also the cheapest of the front three too, which has some appeal to it. Now, for Tony Kroos, I'm not having in my cash core. I'll tell you that. He's just too much for what he is. I feel like to be considered a lock. He's still an interesting option considering he does have Monopoly. He has done pretty well these last couple games. I just worry, like I said, just a little bit about his minutes and a little bit about his upside. He definitely has it in him to get a goal contribution. It's just so much less likely than some of the other guys who are at a similar price. And for GPP, you need guys that put up those big scores because somebody's going to score. It could end up 0-0, I suppose, but not super likely. I'd play him in like a 0-0 build specifically, like with both goalkeepers. But for cash and for most GPP builds, I just don't love it here. Same with Brandt. I think I'd play him over Kroos just because he's got a little bit more upside and is a little bit cheaper. He's a guy who I also worry about for minutes a little bit. Dortmund tend to sub their attackers a lot. He hasn't been one of the guys who's been getting subbed lately, but I think they've had quite a few injuries. Now they're almost completely healthy, at least for attackers. And I think that puts him in a pretty precarious position of getting substituted with how many guys they have. Like you think of Marco Royce, you think of Makoko, you think of Bino Gittins, Haller. There's a ton of guys competing in similar positions to him. But he gets a goal contribution, you're chilling. And even playing him in cash, I don't think is a bad option whatsoever. But once again, similar to Kroos, just not a lock. Volkrug and Royce. I might have a couple Royces, like I said, just because he definitely comes on at some point, maybe take some set pieces. just the storyline be insane if he scored and wins Dortmund the Champions League final on his last game. That'd be pretty crazy. I'm a sucker for narratives like that. I could definitely see myself playing him because of that. Now, Fulkrug should be on pens if there's a lot of goals in this game, which it could happen if there's an early goal. The game could just open up and suddenly it's 2-2 or 3-2. He probably scores if Dortmund's. He probably is the goal scorer if Dortmund score. And at 1,700, that's pretty fair, especially in like a goal fest kind of build. Like you can fit a lot around him for that cheap. So I don't mind him for GPP. For cash, I probably stay away just because, like I said, I kind of think this game will be more cagey than the odds show. But he's not a bad play in any format. Now, Courtois, I really like that play. I might even play him in cash. Like we not Dortmund, sorry. Real Madrid tend to give up a lot of shots on target, which at times leads them to give up a couple of goals, but sometimes Courtois will just stand on his head, as we saw in the Liverpool final just a couple years ago. Like he had 25 points or something just because he made like 5 saves, clean sheets. Like he's I think, pretty favorable GPP captain build even because he's got such a clear path of upside. Like if Real Madrid score early and Dortmund have to throw the kitchen sink, like Courtois either gives up a couple goals or makes like 6, 7 saves. It's not even out of the question. I really like him as a player. I think he's just a super solid goalkeeper. So I really like Courtois here. He's a little bit expensive, but I think it's kind of worth here. Lucas Vasquez, I think he's a little much. Hope he isn't in. Although if he starts, he also has Carvajal to worry about coming in at some point. Another thing to think about. Sancho, I like that as a play a lot. He has his chance of getting subbed, but equally possibility of just going 90 because he's probably got the most talent on that entire kind of attacking front four. If there's someone who could pull something out of nothing, it's probably him. I really like Sancho as a play just because he has a foul drawn floor sometimes, gets quite a few crosses especially when he decides to take set pieces, which is not every game, but it's often. So I like Sancho a lot. 7K is a super fair price too. Arda Güler, I'd love if he played. He'd probably have a share of set pieces, and that's super cheap, but I doubt it. Valverde, a guy who does not get subbed often. It's interesting they have him at center mid. Sometimes he plays wide, just depending on how Carlo sets up. Like he's never kind of the exact same every game. Like I said, he rotates the front three a bit. Sometimes he'll come up with a 4-4-2 and have Valverde and Rodrigo or something wide. So yeah, I like Valverde a lot. I think he could be a sneaky play. He's a little overpriced, I'd say, but because of that, he probably gets a little bit less ownership to make up for that. Sabitzer, he's got a little bit of upside to him, as we saw in the 30-pointer against Atleti. Could say maybe it's a Madrid kind of Madrid scenario where he just does good against Madrid teams. I don't know. I'm just trying to rationalize any kind of storyline I can think of, but he's not bad. I think he'll be super low owned. For cash, I'm probably staying away from him. I think Carvajal's a little bit more safe. Goes 90 most of the time. And 6K, he could be pretty good value here to afford your Vinnies and your Bellinghams and your Crosses or Brants. Same with Sancho. Adeyemi. Uh, I don't know. I just don't really know with him. He just hasn't been great since like the group stage, essentially. And he just has a little bit of minutes worry. He's probably the first Dortmund attacker subbed. However, if 5,800 is a super cheap price for an attacker, I think he is the cheapest attacker that's going to start. He is. So I probably have a share in GPP for cash. Probably not for me. Kobo, like I said, goalkeepers have such a clear path here to do well. Like both of these goalkeepers tend to make saves. Like Kobo's make a ton. So I really like both goalies here. That point average is insane too. 13-point average in 11 games is crazy. I could see him picking up a little bit of steam because of those scores though. I don't know if he'll be that low owned, and he's probably a little bit expensive considering the odds. But I'll have a lot of Kobo. I'll be way overweight in GPP. There's a chance I even play him in cash. I could even go double goalie just because that's so safe for minutes here in a game that could go extra time. Like there know that you know that you're not gonna have to worry about having less minutes than everyone if you have both those guys in. Matson, 5K. This is probably the best value on the slate. He's got a little bit of upside to him sometimes. He gets pretty far forward. He's even taken a couple of set pieces. That's so cheap for a fullback too. Like I think Ferland Mendy's the only one who's cheap. Ryerson is cheaper too, but Matson has so much more upside than both those guys. That I might even have Matson in my cores. How much I like that play. Ryerson, same thing. Not quite as good as Matson, but he's a solid option. Emre Chan, I don't mind too. Camavinga's not bad for that price. And like a Militao or Makoko, I could see myself having a couple of them in a team or two too, just because if Dortmund are chasing, they're just going to throw in every attacker they have to try and get a goal. And if those guys score, that's insane. That's like 12 points at least from a guy who is sub 4K for either of them. Ferland Mendy, man, he's just so anti DFS. Ancelotti said he was he's like the best defensive fullback in the world, and I mean that's great. But for a DFS perspective, that just does not offer points. Like his highest is a 7. That was with a clean sheet. He's had a couple of 5s, but like he struggles to break that 3-point barrier even in like 120 minutes. So last man in, sure, but just don't love him as a player. It makes it hard to play him. Now Hummels. Hummels and Schlotterbeck, I think, could be good ways to get different in GPP. Where was Schlotterbeck? Did I miss him? 3,200 too. Like for GPP construction, build like a goal fest with one of those guys in Brandt, and say they get a goal off of a set piece, you're in a really great spot. If there probably won't be that probably won't be the most owned combo, and could really work out, have a lot of upside to it. In terms of GPP construction, this is a large GPP, 20K prize pool, 100K prize pool, 20K to first. A lot of entries because of that, and you'll want to get different. And because of that, build something unique. Play a substitute. Play like I think an interesting build could be play a goalkeeper in like a build that doesn't make a ton of sense. Like play Courtois, Adeyemi, Brandt together or something. Like it doesn't make a ton of sense on paper to have a striker against the opposing goalkeeper, but if they get like 4 shot on goals, suddenly it works out. And there's not going to be a ton of people who do that strategy because it doesn't make a ton of sense. Like if you're a guy who's not maxing this GPP, like if you're maxed out, you can just play likely scenarios and try to go for the optimal build. But if you're just throwing a couple of darts and just want to just try to win the lottery, let's say, 'cause that's what it basically is. Just do something unique, like a punt captain. There's a ton of different ways to go to be a little bit different. And yeah, play like kind of game stripped a little bit. Like, okay, I think that the first goal is going to be scored by Emre Chan off of a Brandt corner. I'll Chan and Brandt to start. Then maybe Real Madrid score from Jude Bellingham assisted by Rodrigo goal or something. Just game stripped a little bit and build according to be what you think is a scenario that could happen. That's really all it is. And then another big tip I'd say for people is leave salary on the table. If you fade Vinicius Jr. or Jude, it is very easy to kind of leave some left over. If you want to pick a bunch of Dortmund attackers, like that's a way to leave salary. Like it's like people just are afraid to leave anything left over, and that automatically is a big edge because of that. So yeah, that's what it comes down to. Substitute's a good way to get different. Leaving salary, building for a bit of an unlikely scenario. And like people who plug like a double goalkeeper team with like both attackers would be a pretty interesting way to go too. I think since most people when they do a 0-0 build, they'll play set takers since they usually have the floor. However, we've seen that Real Madrid and Dortmund don't kind of quite subscribe to that normal game script a lot of the time because they play corner short. They don't have uniform corner takers. They sub their corner kick takers a lot. And if this game go is 0-0, that means that it'll have gone to extra time. There's a couple of different ways to think about it. Lots of ways to go. In terms of my cash core, I'm probably going Vinicius, Matson, and Bellingham, I think. You could probably even throw Kroos in here too if you like captain a budget option. I don't know if I'll do that necessarily, but I probably go those three in my core. I like all three of them. And yeah, guys, that'll be it. I'm looking forward to Euros in just a couple of weeks. I'm still going to be covering all of the soccer slates, like MLS or these international friendlies, I think are this weekend too, in the FSI Discord that you can reach through the website, through the link below. Make sure you check me out. My name is just CH4R1LIE on all platforms, on Twitter. Shoot me a message too if you'd like. And yeah, guys, that'll be it. And I'll see you for Euros and Copa America. Later, guys.